Hey everybody, welcome to But Why Though Reviews. I'm Kate Sanchez, editor-in-chief of But Why Though Geek Community and head of film, TV, and anime over there. Today I have a very special guest, Swara.
Hi. Thanks for having me back. I am so excited for our discussion.
Yes, because today we're reviewing The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, Season 1. So to kick things off, like we always do, I want to take a second to talk about how we came into The Lord of the Rings, how much we knew about it coming in, and what were our expectations for the series. And you can start, Sora.
Sure. I'll keep it brief. So I was 11 years old and I had never read The Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit. I did had no idea about it. My mom actually really wanted to see The Two Towers. I hadn't seen the first one yet, and I was sort of reluctant going into it, but watching the film, I was completely immersed. I had barely any idea what was going on, but I completely fell in love with Tolkien's universe. I became obsessed. I got the extended versions of the films as a kid, obsessed with those, read the books. Like, I think I've read them twice at least, and of course, read The Hobbit, and obsessed with the Silmarillion. And it's one of my top universes and franchises ever. Like you've said before, Kate, the film trilogy, Peter Jackson's film trilogy, it is the best epic film trilogy ever made, period.
Yep.
Nothing compares. And it's just, I love it so much. And so going into the Rings of Power, I didn't know what to expect. I think I kept my expectations measured, to be
Yeah.
honest. I wasn't sure like how they're going to adapt it. I knew that they were going in different directions than what was in the canon. So, but we will discuss our thoughts going into this conversation.
And for me, so my dad read The Hobbit with me growing up really early. But I think what really sealed the deal was being a little kid and my aunt who was obsessed with Lord of the Rings. Like she read all the books. Um, she was and she is the person in my family who has always loved genre. So she loves fantasy, she loves sci-fi. And what she would do is an excuse to go and see the first showing. This is back when like midnight showings were the actual like at midnight. She would round us up, and I think it was around, yeah, it was around Thanksgiving because she would take us for Harry Potter and Christmas, and Thanksgiving for like that 3 consecutive years was Lord of the Rings. She'd get all the kids in the car, and I remember being little, sitting in that theater, like, why is my aunt doing this? She said it was gonna be cool. Okay. And I had my mind blown and I fell in love with the ideas and the worlds that Tolkien had created. And similar to you, I watched the films and I picked up the books immediately. I did the little kid thing where I started like trying to write in Elvish and like learn Dwarvish, like all of that stuff. So Lord of the Rings to me, actually, like my handle on Instagram and Twitter is Oh My Mithrandir. Like I have worked my love of Lord of the Rings and Gandalf specifically into my entire like online persona. But the thing is like for me, I care about Lord of the Rings so much that I've never talked about it really widely in open social media circles because we all see what happens when nuance kind of goes to die on Twitter. And so that was kind of what I had coming into the series. I've been excited for it from day one. But to your point, like I was a little measured in expectations until they said how much it cost. And then I was like, well, you better be good because you could do a lot with the money that you just spent on this TV show. Um, and I think that it was one of those where I am a person who loves adaptations. And so I come in, if you can make me feel and understand the overall heart of the material that you're adapting, you can make small changes along the way so far as it doesn't impact the message that the original creator intended in what they were doing. So now that we have seen all 8 episodes of season 1, I want to talk a little bit about how we felt when it started. So it was a weekly show on Prime Video. Very specifically, we are looking at a story that it predates the creation of the rings. And as we found out, and this is going to be spoilers, guys, as we found out in the last episode, is what we're leading to. It's also been greenlit for multiple seasons already. So they knew that coming in. Swara, how did you feel that the show started versus how it ended?
I definitely do think now I enjoyed all or most of it. I definitely do think it had a bumpy start, like sort of setting up these various storylines. Some storylines were better than others. I will say I've constantly loved the Harfoots, the progenitors of the hobbits. I think that they captured that so well, and what Tolkien had written about the Harfoots and their migrations that they would take. Uh, but in terms of like the main storyline, yeah, I'll tell you what I think was its main issue. I feel like the first couple of episodes, at the very least, try to make too many callbacks to the original Lord of the Rings trilogy. It just what didn't feel confident enough to like stand on its own.
Yeah.
However, as it increasingly developed, and we got more into the politics of Middle Earth, what's going on with the elves, and once we got to Numenor, oh my god, my mind was blown. Like it was gorgeous, so amazing, and like just this is like I can see where Gondor, where the other Middle Earth civilizations of men came from Numenor. It was just so well done. It was once the show was getting more confident to make its own stance of what it is that it really took off for me, but while still maintaining those same messages and core themes of Tolkien, as you mentioned, Kate.
Yeah. I agree. I didn't rate 1 and 2 badly, but there was a lot of room for improvement. I think for me at the beginning, what was really clear was that the showrunners had a love and a reverence for Tolkien, and they were adapting his material in kind of the same way he wrote, which, if you've read Tolkien, the man needed an editor a lot of the time sometimes. Like, he could explain a
We don't need
tree
10 pages on one
extremely
tree.
well.
Exactly.
And I think for me, that was less about a content of the show and more about the choices made in the editing room for what encapsulated one episode. So when you're shooting episodic television, you need to come from the stance that any episode that somebody sees is maybe the first time that they see it, and it may be their space to come in, especially with a week buffer between. And I felt like sometimes the episodes went too long, and the climax that should have led into next week to get you excited happened about 15 minutes before the episode ended, or didn't happen at all. And I feel like a lot of that, I know some people are like, oh well, saying something is slow is just, it doesn't have action and you're bought in. It's like, no, I want slow building. The first Fellowship of the Ring is extremely slow, but it ends on such an epic note of like hope being pulled. You are now living in despair. What's going to happen? And that has to be done week by week by week. And I don't think that the first 4 episodes do that. And so I found myself just kind of like, oh, the choice to do episodic and the choices in cutting this up, that was the issue for me. I think my other issue, just to get them all like out at the beginning, Elrond looks like his name is Steve. I don't like that. I don't understand the choices made in some of the styling, very specifically like giving elves short hair, especially when the early episodes are focused on a lot of the patriarchal structures of elven society and where Galadriel fits into it. Because I feel like if you remove that ethereal beauty and push them towards traditional masculine like views, you're actually weakening your argument of Galadriel pushing forward past things, and you're making it less interesting. And I think similarly, and I love Disa with all my heart. She is amazing. Her and Doran are perfection. I would have liked to see dwarven women with beards. I'm gonna be honest.
Absolutely.
And so
Absolutely.
it was those pushes from it was those there was those pushes towards modern and traditional ideas of masculinity and femininity while still trying to do something like different with Galadriel, that I felt like the messaging got mixed. And I think that that was really hard for me to kind of overcome. Not so much with the dwarves, because I think their costuming, their makeup, like I forgave that very quickly with how beautiful Moria was. But for the elves, they felt very human to me. Their costumes weren't explicit, like weren't extremely intricate. I think outside of Arondir, like none of them have like that like capturing beauty. I think well, Arondir and Galadriel, like both Morfydd Clark and Ishmael Cruz Cordova, are two very striking people visually. So that ethereal quality comes through and you see that beauty with them. But for everybody else, Chad and Steve are making rings. And I
Yeah.
can't.
I I totally agree with you on that. It's just like I still love the elves generally. And I think like they
Mhm.
do a good job portraying the politics and getting that sort of Tolkien
Yeah.
dialogue right. Although there were certain scenes I'm like, why are you speaking English? We should probably speak Quenya or Cinder in here, but
Yeah.
whatever. I digress. Um, but yeah, I don't understand the choice for the short hair. It should be long, ethereal. They should have long flowing locks.
Yep.
And yeah, I agree with you about the dwarves as well. Like I love Disa. She's probably my favorite character. Love her so much. And also shout out to Sophia Nemvete, who is Black Iranian. So we've got two Iranians in the
Mhm.
show, which is awesome. Um, but yeah, I think we should have had dwarven women with beards. And I agree with you that I think they were trying to like fit into that typical, like I don't know, patriarchal like style
Yep.
more or less. And Tolkien specifically said dwarven women have beards. I have a lot, well, many critiques of the Hobbit movies, but they gave dwarven women beards. They
Yes.
understood the
Yes.
assignment.
Exactly. And I think that like I think for a show that does attempt to, and I don't say attempt because like Tolkien's work is like extremely progressive. We see it with Eowyn, we see it with like it's always it has some faults in some areas, but like it has like Tolkien was looking towards a world that pushed resiliency and intimacy between people. And I use intimacy both in a platonic and romantic sense. And he was able to craft that in ways that bucked a lot of existing stereotypes of who can connect to who, as well as who can love who. Like if you think about the appendices and his love stories there. And I think that this show hits some of that, but it loses some of the complexity in building these worlds out, either equaling the playing field between men and women, specifically in the dwarves, which I think is something that like the bearded women is actually really powerful because dwarven women are always seen on the same footing as dwarven men because they are both capable of doing the same things. And Disa is extremely strong, but like I don't know, you can't inject those pieces. Outside of that, however, I think once episode 5 once episode 4 happens and it cut you see the transition of Arondir leaving the orc encampment, which the orcs are stunning. So beautiful. Like that's what we want. Practical meat like orcs are great. When Arondir is leaving and you hear Disa's song start and it moves to the halls, and there is something so captivating and epic about that moment specifically, where I found myself like, okay, we're here. Like, we are embracing the high fantasy, the large scale culture building that happens within these like different races of Middle Earth. And also, like, it's moving on its own path now. Very similar to what you said about like relying too heavily on the original, because I think the more you relied on the religion or the original, which I'm sorry, nobody's going to touch Peter Jackson. Like that's never going to happen. And I feel like you did, I feel like they tried to, but once that happens, you end up moving towards a story that is pushing out farther, wider, and then pulling all of the people together, which I think was one of the initial things. It's such a stacked character story, like it is an ensemble show. Sometimes there were a little too many characters going on, or you'd move from something super complex into something not. But I think my first 10, I gave 2 10s this season for episodes, and it was episode 7 and episode 8. I think it was episode 8. But episode 7 was where I think my mind was like, these writers get it, because you see like what people need to understand is Tolkien wrote specifically Sam and Frodo and a lot of the Fellowship to get through a lot of his own grief and trauma from World War I and the relationships that he had formed in the trenches. And in that, Lord of the Rings became a story of resiliency and understanding that sometimes you have to stumble through the dark without even knowing if there is light there, but just know that you have to keep going. And I think that every character beautifully captured that. You have Queen Muriel, who is wounded and is still pushing forward. You have Galadriel, who is like, she's trying to be a pillar of strength for Theo, and she's like, I also have lost everyone, and I wish I could tell you that things will get better, but we just have to trust to keep moving. And for me, that it captured Tolkien, and it captured what it means, what those stories mean to me. I did a rewatch of the extended trilogy because our friend's girlfriend had never seen it. And when my days are really rough, I always go back to the Osgiliath speech, because it's like, that is extremely fitting to understanding how you just have, like, sometimes you have to do it. And it's not fair that you have to do it, but you have to get up and you have to keep moving. So, Swara, was there anything for you in this series that really captured the spirit of Tolkien's writing? Because I think it's kind of unfair to just say this is a Lord of the Rings show. Like, it is really a show that's trying to encapsulate so many pieces of Tolkien's universe, not just necessarily one property.
Again, I think it has to be the Harfoots that really fully encapsulate that so well. And it's at the point when the stranger, whom I will, by the way, I will go ahead and say, we still don't know who this guy is. I do not think it is Gandalf. I'm just going to go out and
I
say
know.
that.
My heart hurt. My heart hurt, because if they were going to actually do that, they could have used one of the man's 12 names. They just used wizard. And I was like,
Exactly.
okay.
He is not Gandalf. I refuse to believe it until they say otherwise.
Look, we got sexy Sauron. I wanted sexy Gandalf, but it's
yes.
fine. It's fine.
And Gandalf arrives in 1000 of the Third Age, okay?
Yeah.
Way too early right now. Like, anyway. So it's while Nori and her friend, whose name escapes me at the moment, but while they're searching for the stranger from specifically these white clad, I believe they are Maya, these like white clad witches, right? You know, like for lack of a better term. When the witches, like when one of them, who we thought initially was Sauron, Eminem Sauron, that's what I'm going to call her. So Eminem Sauron.
When they showed her full body, I was like, I knew it. I knew that wasn't Sauron.
Exactly. When Eminem Sauron like destroyed the Harfoots, camp basically, and essentially destroyed their lives, I'm like, holy shit. Because we know like how important it is for the Harfoots to be constantly on the move, but to have their lives completely wrecked like that was mind-boggling. And you think like Nori and her family are going to be completely banished or something, but instead the Harfoot community is like, you know what, we're going to support each other, we're going to build up, we've made mistakes before, and we're going to help you and help the stranger, because none of this is fair. Like you said, it's not fair that any of us should have to do this now, but we are going to do the right thing. And that was so Tolkien to me. And even though like they lost so much, they still like built up, and with the help of the stranger, they were able to defeat these witches. And it was fantastic. I love that so much. Also, the Galadriel speech to Theo I thought was great. And Muriel, oh my God, Queen Muriel, I love her so much. She's like Cynthia Adai Robinson. She is fantastic. Love her so much. And I think that like, when she is unfortunately blinded, that moment when like Elendil and the other guy realize she's blinded, I was just like, your heart breaks so much. It's just
I think that like, I think you're right. The Harfoots, it was, and I did check. I only gave one 10, and 10 was to episode 7, and a lot. And I think I gave a 9.5 to Udun, and then Alloy to give like a 9. But like, I agree, like the Harfoots are like wonderfully done. And I think from there are two spaces where I think the special effects really shine, and it's in the Harfoots and in the orcs. The dwarves are like almost there, but I think there are some shots that of CG Moria that aren't like perfect. But like so far as like making things feel extremely lived in, the orc encampments and the Harfoots, it's perfect. Like that, I remember getting so excited when we see the first opening scene to the Harfoots and they're popping out of their grassed carriages, and it's like this is the magic. Like it's the thought that you could walk in and feel this. It's not the MCU, we filmed it in a studio lot, like, and never saw each other for the 5 years we were making this thing. And I think that that's a lot of the reason why the budget went. And I think that like with you mentioning the Harfoots, and then me very specifically mentioning the entirely practically done burning of like the eruption of Mordor. That, I mean, obviously that wasn't done, or the eruption of Mount Doom and creating Mordor, like that wasn't that was CG, but the actual impact and keeping like all of the dust and the ash and all of that was practical. And I think when you look at the Harfoots and then you look at that, you're looking at situations where they're able to use practical effects to build emotion, because you're not being weighed down by like anything that's visual effects artists are extremely overworked. I acknowledge that. It that being said, it doesn't, like, that falls on the studio, the director, the teams that allow stuff to get past certain levels without checking. And so I think that this series did a really good job of understanding where to use practical, where to use CG, and how to use it to build out a story to make the emotional moments that we just talked about.
Yep, totally agreed. And it just felt so lived in. This is
Yeah.
what I want. And then what they did really take from Peter Jackson's trilogy, like, knowing when, like you said, knowing when to use those practical effects and knowing when to use those CGI effects and letting you feel lived in the world, making you want to book a trip to New Zealand,
Yes.
basically. I do know, by the way, tidbit. I saw that apparently for season 2, they're going to be filming in the UK instead of New Zealand, which
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, we'll see how this goes.
Yeah.
Um, maybe they'll change their minds somehow, like in between. If you're listening, Amazon, please, practical effects, please, real
Yeah.
locations as much as you
So I
can.
will say,
Uh,
if you did they say did they specify where in the UK? Because if they use like the
they
Scottish
didn't. Yeah,
Highlands or something like
that
that,
would
like
be
you could
amazing.
you're gonna
Yes.
get kind of that lush like
Yes.
examples.
Hmm.
But I completely agree with you. Like New Zealand's
Yes.
pretty central to
Exactly.
how
New
we have
Zealand is
come to
literally
think
Middle
of
Earth.
Middle Earth.
Yes.
Yeah. So I
Yeah.
think what for you, um where do you think that this story is going to go now? So we both sound pretty happy with where the series ended up. I know for me, I think it pays off really well on building up on all of those slow moments. I just hope they get better at editing episodes if they're going to continue the weekly release format. I think if you dropped out because you were kind of you weren't in love with the first 4 episodes or the first 2 episodes, um I said it in my full review, rewatch it in totality, and I think that it has a lot to offer for people who love Lord of the Rings. If you check the fact that this is an adaptation and a lot of the changes that they made don't heavily impact the storytelling that we're going to get, um which is fine. It's an adaptation. Like, Peter Jackson changed stuff too, like.
Well, I just want to give like a shout out to Our Lady of Light, Galadriel, played by
Yes.
Morphy Clark. She was consistently amazing. Kate Blanchett would be so proud.
Okay,
eh,
the
yeah,
casting from Wilfred Clark to Kate Blanchett is
yes,
inspired. There is a
absolutely.
complete line there.
So good. So good. And I'm going to hold back on spoilers for the final episode, but those reveals and how Galadriel took them and the acting and the drama, the tension, just, oh, chef's kiss. I loved it so
Yeah.
much. Um, Getting into some spoilers without saying too much. At this point in the story, the 3 elven rings have been created.
Mm-hmm.
So what I want to see, and we know who Sauron is, not gonna like spoil it for
Yeah.
anyone who hasn't seen it yet. What I want to see is the further exploration of the other rings of power, because we know that there were three created,
Yep.
three elven rings untouched by Sauron. There were 16 others, the dwarven and uh rings for men, the men that would become
Mm-hmm.
the Nazgul, that were like heavily influenced by Sauron. That's what I want to see. I want to see how they're going to navigate that somehow, and
Yeah.
maybe we'll get the origin of the ring wraiths, and maybe how the dwarven rings of powers get to the dwarves, including some of whom we've already seen. So I want more dwarves. Also love the dwarves so much. Like Khazad-dûm, Moria, gorgeous,
So good.
absolutely
So
inspired,
good.
so good. Um, and I want to see just more of the like what I'm really impressed with, because I going in the few years before this series, I had no idea what it was going to really. I thought,
Yeah.
are they going to do the Silmarillion? Are they going to do like first stage stories? Well, no. Like what they are doing is what sets up the Lord of the Rings trilogy, as we know. This is
Yeah.
essentially the prequel series to Lord of the Rings,
Yeah.
even though like yeah, I mean, some things look different, but like you said, it's an adaptation. You could just easily imagine it's just
Yeah.
different interpretation. That's still a prequel. So that's what I want to see. I want to see more politics of Middle Earth. I want to see more Numenor. Oh my God, more Numenor. And
Yeah.
again, getting into spoilers, but just like talk about canon of Tolkien, I want to see more of the downfall of Numenor. I want to see how that
Yes.
happens. And I'm just like so excited for that.
Yeah. And there's a lot of runway for them to do it. I mean, they're bought in for multiple seasons. They have the ability to tell a story the right way of the starting point and a solid end. And I think season 2 is going to be bigger. I think season 2 is going to have a lot more moments because I think season 1 was building. It was setting the building blocks and putting in enough. I'm happy we got a siege. Like every Lord of the like there has to be some siege. Like I'm happy we got a siege. So like I'm fulfilled there. But I think things are going to get bigger and I think everything is going to ramp up and all of our characters are going to start experience things even more out of their control. What I really appreciated was how the showrunners, this series started with hope. Um, they pulled it all away. And now we're having people find and create their own pockets going forward. But it has that looming cloud from Sauron. Like the eighth episode, the last episode, it gave everybody was on their path and they're happy. And then it ends with Sauron, and it's like, oh yeah, that's right. He's there now. So I'm excited what we can do. I'm excited what we can see. I think that ultimately there is and I say this as somebody who loves Lord of the Rings like with all her heart. There is a space for people to come into a franchise at any step, and I think that this is going to make people excited who have never engaged with Lord of the Rings outside of osmosis do more. Read the Go watch the extended editions, go read the books, go pick up the appendices, read the Silmarillion, and I think that there has to be space in a world that allows for keeping stories alive and adapting it into new spaces. That being said, I am a little worried about rights holders right now. So Embracer Group bought up pretty much all of the Lord of the Rings licensing for
That was
everything.
wild.
I it was yeah. So I worry about not like where things are gonna go, especially with Embracer Group. Like there is a tabletop Lord of the Rings game. There are two Lord of the Rings video games coming out. Like it's a weird time to be a Lord of the Rings fan because I think unlike superheroes, like it's not it is one property, and now it's one property that hasn't been really touched so heavily being touched heavily. And that's not inherently a bad thing, but I think we have to make sure that we're looking at where everything fits into each other. And so that's probably like my larger concern for like the longevity of the series is everything
Hmm.
that's going to be happening around it. But Swara, do you think, oh, go ahead.
I just want to say, please do not MCU Lord of the Rings, please. or any other franchise, really. No more
Please,
MCUs, please.
please, please. Yes, please. Thank you. Agreed.
I
100%
could tell
agree.
that's what you wanted to say.
Yes, yes, yes. People say I'm too hard on Disney, and I thank you for taking the words out of my mouth.
You can't be too hard on. Okay,
Yes,
never mind.
you can't be too hard on a $1 trillion corporation.
Yes.
But yes, so Swara, do you think that people should watch Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power? Where do you think it kind of sits for existing fans as well as new fans coming in?
I will say the Peter Jackson trilogy is still my favorite. It's still like
It's
I mean,
untouched.
I it's untouched, and I just like, this is a great series. It has so much promise. But again, bumpy start. I do still recommend, obviously, people go into it. Obviously we loved it by the end. It's like, you just got to be a bit patient with it. And if you're already a Tolkien fan and are skeptical of it, I say give it a chance. And if you don't like it, that's also fine.
Yeah.
Um, I just think that this is a really great interpretation of the story. And going back to what you said, Kate, like, it's about understanding the core of Tolkien and what his work is all about. So please give it a chance, but also please, again, do not over franchise Lord of the Rings. We really don't need
We
that.
don't
Just
need
like
it.
leave it untouched for most part. Like, if you're gonna tell other stories in this universe.
Yeah.
I want stories from the Silmarillion. I want more stories from the Second Age. I want more stories from the Third Age. I want,
Yep.
like, they are doing that. They're telling, like, for example, the anime film of the
Yep.
Rohirrim, like, that's
I'm
of
so
Helm's Deep. That's going to
excited.
be fantastic. That's going to be fucking fantastic. I'm so excited for that. Like, specific stories, you don't have to. Lord of the Rings is just one story in the entirety of Tolkien's
Yeah.
Legendarium. So please just focus on adapting those other stories.
Awesome. Well, Swara, why don't you tell everybody where they can find you, your work, how they can keep in touch?
Y'all can find me on Twitter at Spider Swars. I am a writer for Nerds of Color. I've written for But Why Though, IO9, Premiere Time, Polygon, and other sites. I have two podcasts: The Middle Geeks on the Nerds of Color podcast network, and Into the Spider Cast on the But Why Though podcast network. So please check those out.
Awesome. And you can find me at Oh My Mithrandir. I shouldn't have to spell that out for people watching this, I assume. On Twitter, that's where you'll get me talking about all pop culture, everything in existence pretty much. And then for a more curated anime and manga focus, you can look up Oh My Mithrandir on Instagram. You can follow our site at But Why Though PC on all of our platforms. And if you want to get involved in weekly discussions of everything that's coming out right now, there's a lot of content and not a lot of places to have nuanced discussions of what's happening. You can head to our Discord at discord.gg/BUTWHYTHO. Thank you so much. Now I do the like and subscribe point where buttons are happening. Thanks.
Bye, everyone.